The physical act of handing over a newborn child is a moment of profound, irreversible gravity. On March 30th, 1986, a young mother stood in a sterile hospital room and placed her 3-day-old infant into the arms of waiting strangers. The ink on a $10,000 legal document dictated that this was the end of the transaction, a clean break mandated by law and sealed by a signature. But as the door closed and the physical weight of the child left her arms, a catastrophic psychological fracture occurred. The clinical detachment required by the paperwork collided violently with the ancient, visceral reality of human biology. This was not the transfer of an asset, but the severing of a primal bond, and the crushing weight of that realization instantly shattered the illusion of a simple arrangement. The young mother, Mary Beth Whitehead, experienced an immediate and total emotional collapse. The rationalizations that had sustained her through 9 months of pregnancy evaporated in the agonizing silence of her empty home. She had believed she could be a detached vessel, a temporary guardian for another family's miracle. Instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making, overwhelmed by a maternal instinct so fierce it overrode every logical thought and contractual obligation. The promise she had made was breaking, not out of malice, but out of a profound, inescapable biological imperative that no lawyer could have anticipated. Across town, William and Betsy Stern were experiencing a vastly different reality, one built on the fragile foundation of that same promise. For them, the arrival of this child was the culmination of years of desperate longing and insurmountable biological hurdles. They had played by the rules, navigated the emerging, unregulated industry of assisted reproduction, and finally held the daughter they had dreamed of. The Sterns believed the transaction was complete, their family finally whole. They had no idea that the foundation of their new life was already crumbling, and that the quiet desperation of the woman who had given them this gift was about to detonate their world. To understand the depth of the impending collision, one must look at the profound vulnerabilities that drove the Sterns to this extreme measure. William Stern carried the heavy, invisible burden of being the sole surviving heir of a family completely decimated in the Holocaust. The need to continue his bloodline, to ensure that his family's genetic legacy did not end in the ashes of history, was not merely a desire, but a profound existential mandate. His wife, Betsy, faced her own terrifying reality. Diagnosed with a mild case of multiple sclerosis, medical professionals had warned her that the physical trauma of pregnancy could trigger severe, potentially paralyzing complications. The risk was simply too great. Driven by these profound, deeply personal fears, the couple had turned to the Infertility Center of New York. It was there that they were matched with Mary Beth Whitehead, a married mother of 2 who had expressed a desire to help a childless couple. The arrangement seemed like a perfect clinical solution to an agonizing human problem. A surrogacy contract was drafted, stipulating that Mary Beth would be artificially inseminated with William's sperm, carry the child to term, and upon birth, immediately relinquish all parental rights to the Sterns. It was a document that attempted to sanitize the messy, unpredictable nature of human reproduction, reducing the creation of a life to a set of legally binding deliverables. During the pregnancy, the seeds of the impending disaster were quietly sown. The clinical environment surrounding the arrangement operated on a subtle form of institutional gaslighting, a psychological manipulation designed to make someone question their own reality and sanity. By constantly reinforcing the narrative that she was merely a surrogate, an incubator for someone else's genetic property, the system attempted to override Mary Beth's lived reality of feeling the child grow, move, and bond with her own body. She was expected to ignore the undeniable hormonal and emotional transformations occurring within her, to treat the life she was sustaining as a foreign object. When the child was finally born, the profound disconnect between the legal fiction and the biological reality manifested in the most fundamental way possible. The Sterns, celebrating the arrival of their legally promised daughter, named her Melissa. In the very same hospital, the woman who had just endured the agony of labor looked at the infant and named her Sarah. Two distinct identities, two completely different futures were being projected onto a single, innocent life. The foundation of trust was already fracturing under the weight of these conflicting realities. The breaking point arrived the morning after the hospital discharge. The Sterns' joy was abruptly shattered when Mary Beth Whitehead appeared at their front door, in a state of profound psychological distress. She was weeping uncontrollably, threatening to take her own life if she could not hold the child. The clinical detachment of the contract had completely dissolved, replaced by the raw, terrifying grief of a mother who felt she had sold her own flesh and blood. The Sterns, terrified by her erratic state and fearing for her life, made a fateful decision born of panic and misplaced compassion. Believing they could defuse the immediate crisis, William and Betsy allowed Mary Beth to take the infant home for a brief temporary visit. It was a desperate attempt to honor the human element of a situation that the legal contract had entirely ignored. But as the hours stretched into days, the chilling reality of their decision set in. The phone calls went unanswered. The agreed-upon return time passed. The Sterns realized with mounting horror that the woman they had trusted to carry their child had no intention of ever bringing her back. The trap had been sprung, and the devastating realization of absolute betrayal washed over them. The immediate aftermath was a frantic, chaotic scramble for legal recourse. The Sterns, realizing their worst nightmare had materialized, mobilized a team of lawyers to freeze Mary Beth's assets and secure a court order for the child's immediate return. They had entered into a legally binding agreement, paid the required fees, and believed the justice system would swiftly rectify this blatant theft of their promised future. But they were about to discover that the legal system was entirely unprepared to navigate the moral labyrinth of a broken surrogacy promise. Sensing the legal walls closing in, Mary Beth Whitehead made a desperate, fateful decision. She, her husband, and the infant fled their home in New Jersey, embarking on a terrifying cross-country run from the law. They became fugitives, moving stealthily from cheap motel to cheap motel, constantly looking over their shoulders, terrified of being discovered. Mary Beth was now a mother being hunted as a kidnapper for running away with her own biological daughter. The psychological toll of this fugitive existence was immense, driven by a primal belief that her biological connection superseded any piece of paper signed in a lawyer's office. For nearly 3 months, the fugitive family managed to evade capture, hiding in the sweltering anonymity of Florida. The terror of the run deeply affected Mary Beth, who lived in a constant state of hypervigilance. Every knock at the door, every passing police cruiser was a potential threat to the child she refused to surrender. She was entirely consumed by the belief that she was protecting her daughter from a system that viewed human life as a commodity to be bought and sold by the highest bidder. The inevitable confrontation finally occurred when authorities, acting on a tip, descended upon the Whiteheads' Florida hiding place. In a scene of sheer desperation, Mary Beth attempted to pass the infant out of a rear window to her husband, hoping he could escape into the dense underbrush. But the perimeter was secure. The authorities moved in, and the child was physically removed from her biological mother's arms by agents of the state. The desperate flight was over, but the true battle was only just beginning. The infant was swiftly returned to the Sterns, while Mary Beth was left with nothing but a court summons and the crushing weight of her failed escape. The battle lines were now firmly drawn in the New Jersey legal system, setting the stage for a conflict that would captivate and polarize the nation. The Baby M case, as it became known in the press, was no longer a private tragedy, but a highly publicized spectacle that would force society to confront the darkest, most uncomfortable realities of assisted reproduction. As the trial commenced, the courtroom transformed into a theater of intense psychological warfare. The deeply intimate details of both families' lives were dragged into the glaring light of public scrutiny. The media circus surrounding the courthouse fed on the raw emotion of the proceedings, turning a profound human tragedy into daily entertainment. Society was forced to watch as the very definition of motherhood was dissected, debated, and weaponized by teams of aggressive attorneys. The legal strategy employed against Mary Beth Whitehead was brutal and unyielding. Expert witnesses were brought in to systematically dismantle her character, painting her as emotionally unstable, manipulative, and unfit to raise the child she had birthed. The natural grief and desperation of a mother separated from her infant were pathologized, framed as evidence of deep psychological flaws rather than a normal human reaction to a profound trauma. The clinical dissection of her maternal instincts was a devastating continuation of the institutional gaslighting she had experienced during the pregnancy. Conversely, the Sterns endured their own agonizing public trial. They felt a profound, deeply rooted sense of betrayal. They had trusted the medical establishment, trusted the legal framework, and trusted the woman who had promised to help them. Now, they found themselves vilified in the court of public opinion, painted by some as wealthy elitists using their financial power to rip a child from the arms of a working-class mother. The narrative of their desperate desire for a family was often overshadowed by accusations of exploitation and class warfare. At the very core of this bitter legal war lay a fundamental ethical dilemma that the law had never before been forced to answer. Can a woman legally consent to give away a child she has not yet conceived? Does a contract hold more weight than the profound biological and psychological bond forged during pregnancy and childbirth? The Baby M case forced society to stare directly into the abyss of commodifying human life, challenging the comfortable assumption that money and contracts could neatly resolve the deepest complexities of human nature. In March 1987, Judge Harvey Sorko delivered the initial earth-shattering ruling. He validated the surrogacy contract in its entirety, legally stripping Mary Beth Whitehead of all parental rights. He declared that the agreement was binding and formally permitted Betsy Stern to adopt the child. The court had chosen the sanctity of the contract over the biological reality of motherhood, delivering a verdict that sent shockwaves through the legal and ethical communities. The devastation of that initial verdict was absolute. For Mary Beth, it was the ultimate realization of her darkest fears. She had been legally erased from her daughter's life, her biological connection deemed irrelevant in the face of a notarized document. The promise she had broken had resulted in the complete annihilation of her maternal identity in the eyes of the law. It was a profound, systemic betrayal that left her shattered, a mother without a child, punished for the unyielding strength of her own biology. But the legal labyrinth was not yet exhausted. Refusing to accept the permanent severing of her parental rights, Mary Beth's legal team immediately appealed the decision, pushing the desperate battle to the highest judicial authority in the state. The New Jersey Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, recognizing that the implications of Judge Sorko's ruling extended far beyond the lives of the Sterns and the Whiteheads. The highest court was now tasked with untangling the moral wreckage of a broken promise that had captivated the world. In a landmark 1988 decision, the New Jersey Supreme Court delivered a stunning reversal that permanently altered the landscape of reproductive law. In a unanimous ruling, the justices invalidated the surrogacy contract, declaring it fundamentally contrary to public policy. They asserted that the agreement amounted to illegal baby selling, a draconian commodification of human life that exploited women and degraded the sanctity of the maternal bond. The court recognized that a promise made before conception could not legally bind a mother to surrender her child after birth. This sweeping decision restored Mary Beth Whitehead's legal status as the child's mother, validating her biological connection and acknowledging the profound psychological reality of her maternal bond. However, the court's pursuit of justice contained a final, agonizing twist. While the contract was void, the justices still had to determine the physical custody of the child, now a toddler who had lived almost her entire life with the Sterns. Basing their decision strictly on the best interests of the child, the court awarded primary physical custody to William Stern, granting Mary Beth extensive visitation rights. The legacy of the Baby M case remains an indelible scar on the history of family law. It stands as a stark, haunting cautionary tale about the severe limitations of legal frameworks when they attempt to govern the most intimate, unpredictable aspects of human existence. The ruling exposed the dangerous hubris of believing that a contract can cleanly sever the profound biological and psychological ties between a mother and her child. It forced a necessary, painful reckoning with the ethics of emerging reproductive technologies. Ultimately, the resolution offered by the courts could never heal the profound fracture of trust that initiated the conflict. Two families, vastly different in background and circumstance, remained permanently bound together, not by mutual affection or shared joy, but by the jagged remnants of a legal war and a shared biological link. The child at the center of the storm grew up navigating the complex terrain of two separate worlds, a living testament to a surrogacy promise that was broken the moment biology collided with the cold, unforgiving reality of the law. The echoes of that initial deception, the agonizing flight, and the bitter courtroom battles linger, a somber reminder of the devastating human cost exacted when deeply personal promises are shattered.